This is a case, and I pointed out, it's been presented mostly in a negative light, but I don't think it's a negative consideration, that both Bush and Obama pushed back against the generals. In the case of Iraq in 2006, it was the civilian leadership that decided the strategy wasn't working, not the military. So the number of troops required after the invasion in part depended on making smart decisions about what we would do next in Iraq. I said in a speech in May of 2003, just 6 weeks after the invasion, that now that we had overthrown Saddam, it reminded me of the situation where the dog catches the car. Now what do you do with it? And I said at the time, if we have more than 100,000 troops in Iraq for more than a few months, we will be in serious trouble. And I said I thought that the political part of this would be far more difficult than the original invasion. But what is different now, and what has happened over the last, I would say, quarter of a century, is that we have lost the Congress has lost the ability to do the people's business. So it's one thing to argue and fight and say terrible things about each other. That's been going on for our whole history. But the inability to pass legislation to deal with serious problems, I think, is a relatively new phenomenon. And so I argue at the end of the book that, we do have these institutional problems, such as gerrymandering, what I consider the weakening of the role of Congress in governance because of the weakening of the committee chairs and a variety of other things. But at the end of the day, the problem you can begin to, I think, address the paralysis, not necessarily the polarization, but the paralysis by people by people in the White House and people in the Congress beginning to treat each other more civilly, by people being willing to listen and take ideas from the other side, of not demonizing the other side, of not distorting the facts purposely.
When you're representing a celebrity, you don't often want to tell them things they don't want to hear. You confuse your role as lawyer and cheerleader. And I tell my students, if you ever represent important people, celebrities, you have to be prepared to walk into every meeting being ready to be fired. You have to tell them what they don't want to hear. When you're representing the president, you have to be willing to put your finger in his face and say, Mr. President, you can't testify about your sex life. Nobody will believe you. You can't testify about who you've had sex with. I wouldn't believe you. Nobody is going to believe you. You have to figure out a way of not testifying. You have to be able to say that to the president or the CEO or Michael Jackson or whoever it is you're representing or providing medical care to. If you're the doctor and Michael Jackson says, I want this drug to put me to sleep, you have to say, no, you're not getting that drug. That's against medical advice. You can't give people what they want if you're going to be a professional. I mean, there's a long tradition of defending the guilty, and the important thing is think of the alternative. The alternative is if you wouldn't represent somebody you think is guilty, first of all, you're not the judge and the jury, and I've had many experiences where I've thought defendants are guilty and they turn out to be innocent. The opposite, too, where I thought they're innocent and they turn out to be guilty. We're not judge, jury, and executioner. We don't want to live in a system where only people the government regards as innocent get to be represented. First of all, the government wouldn't be prosecuting them if they were innocent. Look, let's face the reality. Most defendants who are charged with crime are guilty. Thank God for that. We wouldn't want to live in a country where most people charged with crime are innocent. That might be China, Iran. It's not the United States of America. Well, it's, first of all, this is an amazing center. This is just absolutely amazing. And the fact that it's bipartisan. I had lunch the other day with Jeb Bush, who is he now?
He's our chair.
Chair. And he was so proud of having given an award to Hillary Clinton because for him, bipartisanship over the Constitution is crucial, and I think for all of us. I mean, there are so few things that bring us together in a country that's so divided. But commitment to our remarkable Constitution, this document, is just so unbelievable. Whether you're a Scalian who believes in the original understanding or whether you believe in a more living Constitution, I believe in both. I believe parts of the Constitution have to be defined by their original meaning, and other parts, due process, equal protection, cruel and unusual punishment, the broad things were given us under a principle of constitutional common law, where we have not only the right but the obligation to construe and interpret them in terms of their meaning today. So I think there are living parts of the Constitution and there are not so living parts of the Constitution. But this document is just remarkable. And for me, I can't imagine any greater privilege than to have been born an American citizen or to be accepted by choice as an American citizen. You know, congratulations to all of you who are active in this wonderful Senate. Congratulations to this center. The Constitution is now the oldest existing document of freedom that continues to operate in the history of the world. May it go from strength to strength. May it continue and endure forever.
We got away from the concept of what's good for America, and very little of the debate was about how do we make the country better and stronger in the future. It really changed the mindset of those who were representing people back home, that the idea was to actually take federal money and bring it home. And that's not the concept of the Constitution. I've heard people use the idea that, well, the Congress has the power of the purse strings. They do, but within the enumerated powers. There are only certain things that we should be doing in Washington. And you mentioned federalism. Not too many people even know what the word means anymore. It sounds like more federal government, but it's that original constitutional idea that the federal government would be limited. The Constitution was a compact between the states to limit the federal government and otherwise leave the states free to operate, compete with each other. And it was never envisioned that the federal government would be centrally controlling most aspects of our economy and our society. Americans organize to do things themselves. And de Tocqueville noted that about our country when he came over in the early 1800s. He was almost stunned that when Americans saw a problem, instead of telling the government to do it, they found a few friends and neighbors and solved the problem themselves. Mm-hmm. And that, so it's not only what works in the community. Edmund Burke used the quote of Little Platoons, pointing out that that's what creates what he called affection for each other and that public affection we have for our country. And you really don't develop that love of country from the top down. You develop it from those people that are closest to you in your life, and an appreciation for the country that allows that to happen. It happens all the time. A lot of the lobbyists working with regulators create these regulatory regimes that make it hard for their competitors to compete with them. They're not doing what they say they're doing. And what I hope the book will do is convince Americans to stop electing people, regardless of party, who say they're going to go to Washington and fix things in Washington. The only way Washington can fix things is to push power, dollars, and decisions out of Washington back where it belongs, to the states and the people.
And we tend to forget because of the way the Vietnam War ended. I will say this, and I will always believe it, the military leadership that took us into the Vietnam War was the best military leadership we have ever had in the history of this country. These people had fought World War II, they had fought Korea, they had studied, the true principles of leadership. I know what it's like to have my father deployed, I know what it's like to be deployed, but I've never had it as hard as when I was a father with my son deployed, emotionally. And I honestly believe that if 25% of the United States Congress had to wake up every morning wondering if their kid was alive, you'd have a different foreign policy right now. There is an overarching paralysis because of how both parties have kind of retreated into their bases, but even given that, we did a lot of good. And I started talking about economic fairness on the campaign trail when I first decided to run. That the true test of the Democratic Party over the years has been whether they will provide a voice to people who have no power and a quarters of power. I talked about social justice. When I was running, I started talking about our totally broken criminal justice system. And I had Democratic Party advisors come up and say, in Virginia, you're committing political suicide if you talk about this. But everywhere I would go, people would start nodding. This is a broken system, and not, it's not political. This is a leadership question. I'm a Democrat. I go back to Ronald Reagan when he came in. When Jimmy Carter was president, people were saying that no one person could be president again. The country was to become too complex to be governable. And Reagan came in, and whether people agreed with what he did or not, he was a leader, and he brought strong people around him, and they got things done. And people, he was positive. He was talking about who we are and what we're doing.
We have learned what sexual orientation is. We didn't know a lot about it. People didn't talk a lot about it. But we now know, and we proved it in this trial, that individuals don't just choose to say, I think I'll be gay. You know, I think I will be. Someone asked me, I thought one of the best questions someone asked me during this case, did you choose to be heterosexual? And of course, no, I didn't. You know, it's me, it's baked into me. It's baked into the individuals who are gay and lesbian. And so when we're discriminating against them, when we're denying the access to rights that society provides to other people, we're taking their characteristic of them as an individual, and it could be race, and it could be something else. It could be legitimacy, which the Supreme Court has addressed. And we're cutting them out of society's rights because of who they are. That's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause, and that's what that dialogue was all about. And you don't have a chance to elaborate and explain to the degree that I've just done in the United States Supreme Court, because it's machine guns being fired at you. So anyway, I was doing the best I could.
As those societies change, you have to change the application. As John Marshall said, you can't forget that it's a constitution that we're interpreting. And so no one, I think, would say, well, we're going to continue to execute juveniles because they did it at the time of the Eighth Amendment, or we're going to continue to have capital punishment for the wide range of offenses that they had at the time of the Eighth Amendment, or that we're not going to apply freedom of speech and freedom of the press to radio and television because they didn't exist, or we're going to permit states to ban interracial marriage and to have segregated schools because you had that at the time that the 14th Amendment was passed. So nobody, as I say, is really an originalist, but in a sense, everybody is originalist because we all go back to those basic principles, but we all agree that they need to be applied to the society that we have now. And how you apply them to the society we have now is really what the disagreement and the debate is about.